Why hasn't Notre Dame joined the Big Ten? There have been massive changes in college football recently. NIL, the transfer portal, conferences being blown up all over the place, and yet Notre Dame maintains their independence. They seem like a perfect fit with the Midwestern schools. They're not a member of the AAU, but we could stop pretending that this matters anymore given the massive money making machine that is college football. They've played many of the Big Ten teams over the years, and yet the Golden Domers remain persistent in their independent status in football, having joined the ACC in nearly all other sports. The reasons for Notre Dame's independence are frequently given that they have a big TV contract that sustains them, and that they've grown accustomed to their independence and wish to maintain it. What nobody talks about, or at least rarely talks about, is the fact that in their early history, they were denied entrance into the Big Ten on 4 separate occasions. That's what this video is about. It's about those 4 times that Notre Dame was denied entrance into the Big Ten. And for that, we're going to go back to the beginning. I'm John Johnston, and this is Hardcore College Football History. College football turned 26 years old in 1895. The game was incredibly different than the one we know today. The forward pass wasn't yet legal. Plays consisted of a mass of men repeatedly smashing into another mass of men. And while there were rules for this sport, there weren't really any rules that governed football. Issues like eligibility and amateurism were lip service, as there wasn't much in the way of enforcement. And this would change with the first creation of a conference in 1895, as 7 schools came together to form the Intercollegiate Conference of Faculty Representatives. From Shake Down the Thunder by Murray Sperber, a book recognized to be the most complete authority on early Notre Dame history. By the 1890s, most major Midwestern universities had faculty boards, but because each school set its own athletic rules, conflicts between institutions frequently occurred. In 1895, 1896, the presidents of the universities of Chicago, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Northwestern, Purdue, and Michigan established the Western Conference to construct a uniform code of intercollegiate sports rules. They insisted that each member's Committee on College Athletics control its school's teams, and they also set up a super committee of faculty representatives from each institution to make new regulation and to run the conference's business. They named the organization the Intercollegiate Conference of Faculty Representatives, but the press and the public preferred geographic or numeric nicknames. Many educators, especially at these schools, hailed the launching and the structure of the Western Conference as a major step forward in the reform of the college sports scene. Notre Dame immediately applied for admission to the conference, but was rejected on the grounds that its university division was not large or serious enough, and also because of its vague player eligibility rules. The key part of that quote for Notre Dame is, its university division was not large or serious enough. More on this in a bit. In 1897, Notre Dame changed its athletic policies to allow only bona fide students taking a full course of studies to play on its teams. They changed eligibility to limit playing time to 6 years, 4 as an undergraduate and 2 as postgraduate. And they did this to align more closely with the Western Conference so as to better position themselves to join. 2 items of major interest occurred in 1908. First, Michigan withdrew from the Western Conference because they objected to 3 rules: a limit of 5 games per season, elimination of the training table, and a retroactive rule that no player could participate for more than 3 years. Michigan is being led by Fielding Yost at this time, and the reasons for leaving the conference are perfectly valid. Yost knows Michigan needs more than 5 games a year to become a prominent national power, and the faculty boards are purposely doing this to control college football from becoming too big, something that they resent already. The retroactive rule is a direct shot at Michigan because they're better than everyone else in the conference except for Chicago. Michigan won't rejoin the conference until 1918, and that's really a separate video that needs more examination from Michigan's perspective. With Michigan leaving, Notre Dame sees another opportunity to join from Shake Down the Thunder. Notre Dame applied again and was rejected, prompting Father Crumley's remark about the battle being theological rather than athletic. Father Crumley was correct, but in more than one sense. The Western Conference representatives not only showed contempt for Catholic higher education with its emphasis on religious training and open admissions, they also scorned the idea that the Notre Dame faculty board could control intercollegiate sports at the school when in the theological world in which it existed, it had limited power. Remember that phrase earlier about Notre Dame not being serious enough? The best reference on this I could find comes from Natural Enemies, the Notre Dame Michigan football feud by John Crick. Athletic matters aside, faculty at the state-run universities in the Midwest had long looked down at denominational schools such as Notre Dame, deeming the educations they provided as purely second-rate. Such academic elitists were the ones who ran the Western Conference, and it was they who continually rebuffed Notre Dame in its attempt to join their old boys club. Thus, the earliest squabbles between the conference and Notre Dame were rooted in academic snobbery and likely no small amount of anti-Catholic discrimination too. Now, since the 1908 rejection, most teams of the Western Conference stopped playing against Notre Dame. Michigan, having dropped out of the conference, plays Notre Dame in 1908, losing 12-6 at Ann Arbor. They play again in 1909, and again Notre Dame wins 11-3. It's a shock to Michigan. Michigan coach Fielding Yost tries to bluff off the game as an exhibition, not caring whether Michigan won or not. Now, there's another game scheduled in 1910, but Yost cancels the game, complaining about the eligibility of two Notre Dame players, Ralph Dimmick and George Philbrook. The complaint quickly becomes a huge story across the nation. The year before, 1909, Michigan's captain Joy Miller had been ruled ineligible after it was found he hadn't actually enrolled in engineering classes. He was expelled, but the Chicago Record-Herald newspaper charged Michigan had played 3 other ineligible players. The charges proved false, but Michigan remained embarrassed. Now, how better to make up for embarrassment but by pointing the finger at someone else? From Natural Enemies by John Crick. Why did Michigan go to such great lengths to cast Notre Dame into disrepute? This question is the crux of the entire controversy. We'll never know for sure, but this is the probable answer. Michigan didn't like the fact that its commitment to pure athletics had been publicly questioned after the 1909 season, after the Joy Miller scandal, and the Chicago Record-Herald's charges. Although Michigan was not in the conference anymore, it cared deeply about how it was perceived by its former brethren. The last thing it wanted was to be classed with the common renegades of the West. After all, Michigan's difference with the conference lay in technicality, not wholesale policy. That's why Michigan officials in 1910 were intent on proving their athletics were indeed clean. One way was to bar all football players against whom there was even a hint of suspicion, which they made an effort to do. But perhaps the best way was to break off relations with Notre Dame, a school already blacklisted by the conference, and in doing so, show the conference that the Catholics were the real dregs of athletic society, not Michigan. If this was Michigan's plan, it couldn't have worked out better, because the Wolverines' reputation was largely repaired, and Notre Dame was cast not only into disrepute, but into oblivion. Michigan refuses to schedule another game with Notre Dame, and they don't play again until 1942 after Yost is gone. The Western Conference, or Big Ten, boycotts Notre Dame, which leads to Notre Dame having a serious problem because they can't find anyone of high enough caliber to play them. And they're not going to gain national prominence by beating the teams that will play them. Here's a look at the 1912 schedule. Pittsburgh and Marquette might have been decent opponents, but the rest are really just walkovers, or what I would call these days body bag games. Worse than that, it's not just that they're playing poor competition, it's that they're also losing money. So in 1912, Notre Dame takes steps to rectify the situation. They hire their first full-time coach and athletic director, a Protestant named Jesse Harper, for a massive salary of $5,000 a year. Harper had learned football under Stagg at Chicago, and he signs to coach varsity football and baseball and run the business of the athletic department. His goal is to figure out how Notre Dame can start playing good quality opponents. Their initial hope is that he can break the impasse with the Western Conference and begin to schedule teams like Purdue and Indiana again, but he does not. Instead, Harper takes Notre Dame national. He gets a game with Army in 1913, and I've done another video about how that game might be the most important game in college football history. They play Penn State as well in 1913 and Texas in Austin. They go 7-0, undefeated as an independent. In December 1913, Notre Dame tries to join the Western Conference again. From Shake Down the Thunder. In December 1913, because of the growth of the student body and to ensure stable future athletic revenues, the Notre Dame administration decided to apply again for Western Conference membership. In preparation to bring its football program in line with Big Nine regulations, it ended freshman eligibility and tightened other rules. Jesse Harper told the press that Notre Dame is the logical successor to Michigan, still outside the group. But at its annual meeting, the conference, led by Chicago and Minnesota, rebuffed the Catholic institution. Its representatives argued that Notre Dame's athletic success indicated lack of faculty control and systematic cheating. Thus, according to a Notre Dame reporter, we were deemed undesirable by the Athletic Trust of the Middle West. Because in future Notre Dame disputes with the Big Nine, the conferencemen acted on the basis of rumors, refusing to ascertain the truth. In fact, Notre Dame ran a cleaner athletic program than most of their schools, and because it had a small disorganized alumni, it was not burdened by old grad and booster interference with its football team, as was the case at the Big Nine schools in Michigan. This rejection puts the nail in the coffin of Notre Dame trying to play within its geography. It pushes Notre Dame into independence and a national schedule. This sets the stage more than anything else for Notre Dame to become who they are today. Before we move on, we're going to examine what is going on in American society at the time in question. This channel is about history and college football, not just college football and the greatest games, the greatest plays, the greatest coaches, the greatest teams. College sports isn't played in a vacuum. One of my goals in the channel is to show how the actions in society or in the world affected the game that we would love most. On we go. In 1911, in Aurora, Missouri, a newspaper called The Menace begins circulation. It is an anti-Catholic publication. It begins on April 15th, 1911, as a 4-page newspaper with 22 subscribers. And in less than 3 years, it reaches over 1 million people. The menace isn't against the Catholic Church, but what it's against is Catholics holding places of power, because it states that Catholics' first allegiance is with Rome, not the United States, and Catholics in power therefore could not be trusted to uphold the Constitution of the United States. Now, the paper's circulation drops with the advent of World War I as the nation turns their hate from Catholic to Germans. But after World War I, circulation grows again. A fire in 1919 destroys its building, but the publishers launch a new venture called The New Menace in April 1920. The New Menace proudly reported the slaying of a Catholic priest by a Methodist Klan member in 1921, and the paper would defend the actions of a Klansman throughout its run. The New Menace continued raging against papal tyranny until 1931, when it finally ceases publication. In 1915, a man named D.W. Griffith releases the first blockbuster movie in human history. The movie Birth of a Nation is instrumental in launching the second incarnation of the Ku Klux Klan. I'll let Nancy McLean, author of From Behind the Mask of Chivalry, The Making of the Second Ku Klux Klan, tell you how this happens. In this racist epic of the Civil War, Reconstruction, and the restoration of white rule, Griffith harnessed all the emotive power of modern filmmaking technique to convince viewers that black men were beasts and white vigilantes were the saviors of American civilization. Given the right to vote and hold office, the film averred, African American men dragged society into chaos. Worse, they used such power to stalk white women. Griffith left no doubt about how this fate had been averted. In the final climactic scene, the hooded and robed members of the Ku Klux Klan rode in to save his young white heroine from rape by castrating and lynching her black would-be assailant. Their act ended sectional fratricide among white men and gave birth to a reunited America. The Second Klan begins on Thanksgiving 1915 in Atlanta, started by William J. Simmons. He and 15 other men light a wooden cross aflame outside the city at a spot known as Stone Mountain. By 1920, there are a few thousand Klan members. By 1925, the Klan will grow to 2.5 to 5 million members. And unlike the first Klan, it is not isolated to the South. While the Klan has support in such states as Maine, Colorado, and Oregon, 40% of its membership resides in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. Indiana is so heavily populated with Klan members, it earns the nickname Klandiana. On July 4th, 1923, an estimated 200,000 Klansmen gather in Kokomo, Indiana to hold mass rallies. While blacks in the South bore the brunt of the Second Klan's violence, its targets included Catholics and Jews, its primary focus being Catholics. Catholic immigrants from Ireland, Italy, Eastern Europe, and Germany came into the United States in the millions in the previous decades, competing with native-born American workers for jobs and wages. Prohibition is passed in 1920, lasting until 1933. Prohibition stopped the production, importation, transportation, and sale of alcoholic beverages. Prohibition is yet another battlefield in the culture war of the 1920s. It happens because of a growing women's movement around suffrage and temperance, but a big thrust because of the resentment towards non-Protestant immigrants and the desire to control them through the passage of an amendment outlawing alcohol. In the spring of 1924, the Ku Klux Klan intends to hold a clavern in South Bend and to march upon Notre Dame from Shake Down the Thunder. The Klan newspaper, the Fiery Cross, promised that more than 200,000 members, the size of the estimated crowd at a Kokomo rally the previous year, would begin arriving on Saturday, May 17th. The Notre Dame students, showing fighting Irish spirit, decided to oppose the Klan with guerrilla warfare. On Saturday, small groups of students ambushed arriving Klansmen at the train station and on town sidewalks, grabbing their robes and hoods and tearing them apart. Skirmishes continued through the weekend, and when some South Bend police intervened on the side of the Klan, a number of students, according to one vivid report, were injured seriously and were taken to Holly and Mike's pool hall, where they rested on the tables, red blood staining the green felt until medical help arrived. Then on Monday night, a rumor swept the campus that the Klan had killed a Notre Dame undergraduate. The dormitories emptied, and an army of students marched to the South Bend courthouse, intent on battling the Klan and the local police. President Walsh drove to the courthouse and, standing on the cannon outside the building, informed the crowd that the rumor about the murdered student was false. He also asked, "Whatever challenge may have been offered tonight to your patriotism, whatever insult may have been offered to your religion, you can show your loyalty to Notre Dame and South Bend by ignoring all Klan threats." He ordered the students to return to campus, stating that a single injury to another Notre Dame student would be too great a price to pay for fighting the Klansmen. That is a very long quote, but it gives you a sense of what's happening between Notre Dame and the Klan. In 1926, Notre Dame tries again to join the Big Ten Western Conference, and again they are refused admittance. A coach named Newt Rockne, you might have heard of him, took over for Jesse Harper in 1918. He spends the 1920s building Notre Dame and himself into legendary status. Rockne is charismatic, a charmer so well known and beloved, he will have a feature film released about him in 1940, and Ronald Reagan will be playing a dying George Gipp. Win one for the Gipper will forever become a part of the American sports vernacular. Rockne wins Notre Dame's first national title in 1919, then adds titles in 1924, 1929, and 1930 before his death in a plane crash in 1931. Michigan head coach Fielding Yost begins a feud with Rockne, and it's an incredible feud. Though the two teams never faced each other, they will spend their years attacking each other's program, both in public and behind the scenes. Again, in 1926, does its best to bring its athletics policies in line with the Big Ten. It stopped allowing its freshmen to play other schools' teams, as the Big Ten did not allow freshmen to play at all. Notre Dame had a long history of intra-hall squads. Students at Notre Dame at the time stayed in dorms according to class, and they would play each other in sports. At times, they'd play other schools. This was a source of consternation for Notre Dame's competitors, as they felt Rockne was using it as an unfair advantage. Notre Dame stopped its inter-hall competitions for the sake of the Big Ten, but it didn't do any good. Notre Dame was once again attacked from Shakedown the Thunder. As the day of the conference meeting approached, the Big Ten coaches opposed to Notre Dame membership began feeding rumors to their friends in the press. Amos Alonzo Stagg of Chicago reheated tales about Notre Dame using its prep school as a 4-year football training camp for the varsity. Notre Dame had phased out the secondary school in the early 1920s. Fielding Yost of Michigan retailed preposterous stories about Rockne's hiding and training players on the inter-hall squads for 5 and 6 years before suiting them up for 3 varsity seasons. Other Big Ten men claimed that Notre Dame never declared football players ineligible, no matter how many courses they failed. From Fielding Yost's Legacy to the University of Michigan by John Behe, published in 1971, we find Yost stating in a letter, "I was in Battle Creek at the Battle Creek College football banquet and found that they have played Bronson Hall of Notre Dame in one of their football games. In other words, they are without restriction. They have competition for all their teams, hall teams, freshman teams, and second teams. They can play as long as they like and be absent from college 2 weeks, and so far as I know, never have a man ineligible scholastically that was a good varsity man." The same quote can be found in Crick's Natural Enemies. Bottom line, Notre Dame's bid to join the Big Ten is rejected again. From Shakedown the Thunder. Michigan had lined up the votes to veto Notre Dame's bid. Rockne interpreted the rebuff as a triumph for Fielding Yost's religious prejudices. The Notre Dame coach always termed his rival a hillbilly from Tennessee and hence very narrow on religion. Notre Dame will not apply for Big Ten membership again. There are a number of specific issues at the very beginning in the 1890s when Notre Dame tries their first time to join the Big Ten. There's the anti-Catholicism that exists for decades. There's the feud between Fielding Yost and Newt Rockne, both very successful coaches and both very driven by their egos. That feud is amazing. I will be doing another video about that because it's beautiful stuff. It's not quite Reign of Terror, Hidden Lust, Forbidden Desires that make a great miniseries, but it's pretty close. Now, another issue for Notre Dame is the academics. Notre Dame is looked down upon by the Big Ten. One thing that isn't really talked about a lot, an underlying current through all of this, is that around 1900, Notre Dame began to become very successful in their sports. They become very successful in not just football, but in baseball. And baseball is a huge sport at that time. That is a huge driving factor for why the Big Ten didn't want anything to do with them. Yost and Amos Alonzo Stagg, both very successful coaches at Michigan and Chicago, and they knew that Notre Dame under Rockne, if admitted to the conference, would be a contender in many sports immediately, and they wanted nothing to do with it. With regards to anti-Catholicism, I grew up Catholic. I got my share of snide remarks about it in my earlier years. I usually forgot them or wrote them off as someone trying to make a bad joke, but I didn't forget them if they did it more than once. And here we see that Notre Dame is rejected not once, but 4 times by the Big Ten. Now, you might have the attitude that this happened a long time ago, over 100 years ago, and everybody should just forget about it. Now, if you're in your 20s or 30s, I can understand that. But if you're an old crusty guy, an old man like me, you realize that people hang on to things forever. Let's consider the lifespan of a human being and just say it's 75 years for argument's sake. 100 years ago isn't even 2 people ago. This is like your grandfather or your great-grandfather who experienced this stuff firsthand, especially if they went to Notre Dame. Sports hate is different than real hate. And what I've shown is that in the history of Notre Dame, they've had to deal with real hate. And that's something you carry with you the rest of your life. It's difficult to forget. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with Notre Dame over the next few years with all the changes going on in college football. There's huge TV contracts. Players are going to be paid or ruled as employees. What's going to happen to Notre Dame? Will they fully commit to a conference? Will it be the Big Ten? Don't be shocked if they never join the Big Ten. I'm John Johnston, and this is Hardcore College Football History. Thank you.